Welcome to the Well-Rounded Retirement Podcast with John and Jim from CRIS Financial. In this podcast, we help you take a well-rounded approach to retirement planning so you can retire with complete certainty. If you're looking for proven and straightforward retirement advice, ranging from how to protect your assets to how to spend with confidence, this show is for you.
Hello and welcome to Well-Rounded Retirement with Jim Donewald and John Glowacz from CRIS Financial. Good afternoon. How are you, Jim?
Doing good. How you doing, Eric?
I'm doing fantastic. I know that John, your compatriot, is not sitting next to you. Where's he at today?
Unfortunately, John had hip surgery. So while he's doing quite well, he's not running around the office just yet. So he had a hip replacement. It all went well. So that's good. So it's good. He'll be back shortly. He misses doing the program. Right now, I think he's medicated at the moment, so we don't want him giving financial advice.
And I'm sure once he's back on his feet, that new bionic hip is going to be amazing. What is it, a $500,000 man or $1 million man?
Yeah, something like that. Quarter million.
The question is, are you going to hear that noise as he's walking? Like, zzz, zzz, zzz?
I hope not. I hope not. I think he's taller now, though. I think he said he's taller, so that's
nice. I think that's great. A little height advantage. He doesn't have to get a step stool out anymore.
Not
All
anymore.
right. So what are you and I talking about today?
We're going to go into the third part of the biggest mistakes retirees make. We talked about sections 1 and 2, and everything overlaps. No matter what we discuss, it obviously overlaps. What we're going to talk about today is people not diversifying their retirement plans. And when I say plan, it's your portfolio. It's everything. And we have found that, there's critical stages right before retirement, the first few years of retirement. That seems to be the most important, because if things don't go well, that unfortunately sets us up for problems down the road. Whereas after we're 10, 15 years into our retirement, we can weather a lot more storms. So we really like to say is there's a couple of different ways we go about doing this. And like I say, everything, there's so many things that tie into it. That's why you got to have a planner that can really take all these into account, because we talk about them specifically, but everything plays off everything else, so to speak. So one of the things we like to look at is, risk score or goal-based investing. And we are what's called a goal-based investment. So what we like to do is, what is the goal or the purpose of this money? To me, that is the number one question that I ask everybody. It's the number one question they should be asking themselves is, what do I want this money to do? And the reason I say that is because I know so many people out there use these risk scores, and that's all helpful. But if somebody doesn't want to take any risk, for example, and they still need to grow their money by quite a bit, that's not going to work. We want to know what the goals are of these funds, or at least this part of their funds, so we can figure out what's the best way to accomplish whatever the goal is. Plus, to me, that's the only way you know how to measure if we're accomplishing our goals, is are we getting there? If you chase returns, it's been our experience that you're just going to shoot yourself in the foot. Mm-hmm. So while everybody likes great returns, we've got to make sure that we're accomplishing our goals, because we find a lot of clients come into our office and they're taking a lot of risk that they don't need to, given their goals are pretty modest, and then vice versa. People that aren't taking any risk and their goals are pretty aggressive, and those need to be in alignment one way or the other. Doesn't make any difference to us if you want to take more risk, but you need to be aware of how that's all going to play out.
Don't you think it's because people don't understand true time frames? I mean, as far as if they're taking too much risk, they just think, oh man, I've really got to make up some ground, or I've got to do this, and they're not really clearly looking at how far out their goals are compared to the time that they have?
Well, I think that's one, and we've been brainwashed, more risk, more return. And while that's true to some extent, you have to be realistic. I'm 58 years old, and if somebody comes in my office and they're 70 years old and they got 100% of their money in the market, to me, that's way too much risk, regardless of what their goals are. So like I said, risk is important. We need to understand that, but there's better ways to accomplish what they're looking to. We believe in a quadrant system, and how that works real briefly is basically there's 4 parts, obviously a quadrant. The first part is, what do we need to live on immediately? Mm-hmm. And so that needs to be very liquid, very low risk. Then we have another quadrant where we have some protection, some floors. There's a lot of different instruments that will provide that, or vehicles we can use. Then we want to put some in a moderate, growth, blue chips, that kind of thing, dividend paying stocks. And then we also want growth. We may be in retirement for 24 to 30 years. Who knows? I don't know, depending what age you retire. So we don't want this money to ever stop growing. But the idea behind our approach is that when you need these funds, we want them to be available and not at a loss. That, to me, is the huge part.
Yeah, would absolutely be huge. This was not diversifying your retirement. That's mistake number 5, correct?
Yeah, exactly. On one of our previous podcasts, we talked to David McKnight and the tax consequences. And so that's always on the forefront of my client's mind and mine as well. So how are we going to deal with this? And based on risk and what assets they have and where they're already positioned, has a big effect. Most people are unaware that there's 2 big risks out there. One is called systematic and one is unsystematic. And unsystematic risk is this is why you have a diversified portfolio. Certain companies, even if they're all in the energy sector or the utility sector, you have multiple companies, and that protects you from any one company going south and hurting your portfolio. And diversification is very good based on that. But then there's systematic risk. That's things like a recession. Maybe you heard of something called COVID-19. Things like this where it affects the whole market simultaneously, the tech wreck, the housing bubble. And so we also want things that are completely uncorrelated to the market if we can, to help protect against that kind of risk as well.
Got it. That makes a lot of sense.
Besides diversifying our portfolio, which is a critical part of our design, I think, as well as almost any professional, we also want to look at where these funds are coming from when we're withdrawing them. And that's one of the mistakes we find all the time, too, from our clients is even if they have a lot of money, let's go back to, February, March of this year, there was a large drop in the market. And anytime there is, we hopefully are not going to our stock portfolio to grab money we need to live on. We try to limit withdrawal risk by setting up different programs. I believe in stocks. I believe in bonds. These are all good places. But the stock market was never designed to hand you a paycheck every 30 days. So what we want to do in our withdrawal strategy is plan for these events that we know are going to happen. We know the market goes up. We know the market goes down. Let's not be surprised by that. So if we know that, how do we figure out with our foundation, with our pension, our Social Security, maybe we have rental properties, we have our expenses covered with that money, or at least most of them, so that what we need to take from the market is at our discretion. So when the market's up, it's easy to take from it, but when it's down, we don't want to. So our firm believes in embracing the vehicles that accomplish your goals. And that to me is so important because we want correlated, non-correlated. You want to be always conscious of taxes. At least we're very conscious of taxes. And one of the myths we get into lots of times with people say, well, the stock market, it's 100% liquid. Well, that's true. But if you're trying to take an income off your portfolio, let's say, and it drops 30%, we all know that if it drops 30%, I don't know, you need to make 43% just to get back to even. Mm-hmm. So if it drops at 30%, do you really want to take money out? How are you going to take money out if you still need that money that it's generating? Do you know what I'm saying there? You're just digging yourself a hole. So when people say it's liquid, yes, it is. I mean, for that matter, everything's liquid with a penalty and a fee and a fine, but it's not really liquid. That's a myth because if you need that money to live on, then you need X amount of money growing. And if it's down and you take a withdrawal, that's a big problem.
Well, I don't think anybody looks at their monthly budget and says, from their current income, with their job, here's the percentage I need of income. No, you know what you're going to earn in your paycheck, right? I think that is where so many people make that mistake is that they think, okay, I'm going to take percentage from my retirement compared to exactly what you said earlier. Know what your budget is. Know how much you're going to be spending on a monthly basis. They're saying just percentages. If you lose 30%, that percentage, you can still take out the same percentage for your monthly income, but your monthly income, the dollar amount went way down. And of course, like you said, then you're doing more long-term damage because you don't have that growth. I think people just need to change their way of thinking.
Well, you're exactly right. And we bring that up, and thanks for bringing that up, because that's exactly what I say is nobody lives on 5% or 4% or 3%. You live on $10,000 a month, $15,000 a month, $2,000 a month. That's what you need month in and month out. And it's always, when we talk about this, we always do it in percentages because it's easy for us to explain, and that is how it works. But the reality of it is like I said, you need $7,000 a month, and you don't care where it comes from, whether that's your pension, you got a nice pension, or you got Social Security plus a small pension, or some of that's coming from rental properties, but those are the funds that you need. And that's where the plan comes into place. So these are the funds we are used to required income from. We need X amount of our portfolio to provide income. The beautiful thing that we find is that probably most people can accomplish a smaller percentage of their portfolio than they think their income needs via these different tools. Like I say, whether it's Social Security, pensions, real estate, other investment tools that we have, that allows to free up other cash to put into that long-term growth, because I'm all for it. I plan on having a long retirement. Nobody knows, but I want a long retirement. And in order to get that, I need this money growing all the time. And that's always part of the plan here is how do we get to grow it efficiently, not too much risk, take money as we need it, not jeopardizing our future. We talk a little bit about bonds and bond ladders, and right now I'm just not a fan because bonds are, very low these days, and that's tough. And to get any kind of decent bond return, you need a very long duration, which is just a long period of time. And then we talk about liquidity. So let's say I've bought a bond, and I don't even know what you can get these days. 5% if you go out 20 years. You don't have a risk if you hold it to duration the whole time. But what happens if you need to get out of that prior to that? Mm-hmm. Because, I don't know, maybe you got a health issue. Maybe something happened where you're in the hospital now. Those funds that you didn't think you were going to need till 2027, you need them today. And you have to sell whatever the current market's doing. So that can be very risky, even though people don't think about it that way. Or they buy bond funds. And I don't think people understand that when you're buying bond funds, even if you hold on to your holdings, if somebody else needs to liquidate their bond fund portion because they need the money to live on, it could be affecting the bonds you're holding and causing them to lose money just as being part of this fund. So these are all things you need to take into account. I'm not saying anything's good or bad. You just need to realize what the risks are and, can I hold this to duration? What are my options? What else is out there that could possibly do better?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a ton of information in this podcast very quickly, even though it's been short so far. These mistakes are a big deal, right? I mean, you guys have really talked about it over the last two podcasts, including this one now. And I just want to kind of recap what those mistakes are for the audience. So if you're just joining this podcast for the very first time, please go back and listen to the first two. The first podcast, they covered not having a plan at all. That's the first mistake, and I think that is probably the biggest mistake. Mistake number two, using old economy rules in a new economy, which I thought was fascinating because I'd never heard that phrasing before. So that's in the first podcast of this series. And in the second podcast of this series, the first mistake you covered, which is mistake number three, not being tax-wise. Great information, but I think that also kind of led to you guys saying, you know what, let's get David McKnight on the show, which he was a fantastic guest, another podcast to go back and listen to. So that was mistake number three, is not being tax-wise. Mistake number four was not accounting for inflation, which we know is a big deal, and it's an unknown, in the future years. We have no idea what inflation's actually going to do. So that's something to consider. And then today it was not diversifying your retirement plan, taking income withdrawals from vehicles that can go up or down, and then counting on bonds for income. Now, one of the things you said earlier in this podcast was about the quadrants. And I was following along, Jim. I promise I was following along, but it's not exactly clear to me. Can you give me an example, kind of a story of what you did with one of your clients so it's kind of a little bit more clear for me?
We had a client come in here, and we're putting their plan together. It was very clear that they had some tax issues. They had some vehicles they still needed to fund, and they were worried about long-term care and health events as well. So kind of how this breaks down is in the first quadrant, without getting into the dollar amounts, this would be the money they needed to live on in the short term. So what we put was, this could be your basic checking account. This is just, cash or money that you can get to very quickly. We also did a vehicle that is kind of a growth vehicle. It's not a bond ladder, but it is based on paying out over a number of years. In this case, it was over 5 years. And this was to help fund some insurance they had. So we knew this was coming due. We just planned on it. It's very simple. At the end of the year, this will generate X amount of money. That's what they needed to fund the plan. So that goes in the first quadrant.
Now, when you say short term, give me a definition of short term.
Yeah, that was 5 years, 5 years or under.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah, that's what we're looking at, because there was enough where it wasn't, I didn't want that kind of money sitting in a checking account for 5 years,
Yeah.
but we knew it was going out. So we didn't really want to invest it in anything that we thought, was too risky or crazy, because we knew that we didn't want to put it in anything, that was too risky, because we knew those monies already had requirements. We put a plan together for them, and we knew they were going to need X amount every year for the next 5 years. Then we moved on to what I want to call the second quadrant, which is anything that has a floor. It could be CDs, it could be bonds, it could be an annuity. They already had an annuity before we met, and so we that kind of goes in that section. That was part of also what they're going to live on. We knew that was very, very safe, and what that helps us do then is that get the growth section that we want, because what I see a lot of people do is if they don't break their money up at all, let's say, they're just moderate risk. So then they've got 100% of their portfolio in something moderate. That may or may not work out for them. How we structure it is if we aren't counting on spending this money, in the first, 5-10 years, we can put some of this into a more of a growth instrument. The market is very good for growth. We need two things. We need time, right? And we need patience, because I can't tell you exactly when it's going to happen. We could get it right away, maybe into 3 years. So the third bucket we use is what I call balanced, or this would be your blue chip stocks. This would be, any dividend paying stocks, something that was, good for growth and income. And then the fourth section is growth. And like I said, so depending upon how this all plays out and the client's needs and goals and the purpose of this money, is this money to leave to my heirs, for example, where I've got a very long time frame because they don't see themselves needing it? Or is this going to replace, the money in bucket number one shortly because we need more money than this annuity or these other plans are providing, or we want to raise later in life? So they're all interchangeable. As we get older, we maybe want less rest. We're just going to dial it down just naturally, just because we just don't want to take the risk. Or we have the opposite effect. After 5 or 10 years into retirement, we find out for a lot of our clients, we can get a little more aggressive because, frankly, their lifespan isn't as long. And lifespan magnifies all these risks, because the longer we live, the more subject we are to market volatility, the more subject we are to other health problems, the more subject we are to recessions, you name it. Just the longer you live, obviously, the more susceptible you are. It's a multiplier. So as we get a little bit older and we've passed through some of that, we can take more risk in many cases. It just depends what the client's looking for.
So when you're looking at the quadrants, I'm kind of looking at a stack here. With the quadrants, is it fair to say that the top, being the most liquid, is the least risk because you really aren't even investing that? You've got it in the checking account and so on and so forth. And then going down in order, does it get a little bit more risky as you go down? Because that's, like you said, the last quadrant, you're looking for more growth. So that seems to me a little bit more risk.
Exactly. So think about it this way. Let's just pick a number, $1 million, and you have 200,000 maybe liquid that you need to live on. Your other living expenses are maybe taken care of with 300,000. There's $500,000 there. And then we want, like I said, we want growth because we may be in our retirement 20, 30 years. I don't know. So between that then and the growth bucket, you would put the remainder. So, typically for my clients who are on a little more conservative side, the growth bucket is usually pretty conservative, maybe 25%. It can be more. It just depends, like I say, on the client, their needs. But what I tell them is, so when the market, goes down, that's where they're going to see it. Every bucket is kind of an island unto itself. They're all insulated from each other because there's different investments in them. When you see the big gains, you're going to see it in bucket number 4. When you see the big losses, you're going to see it in bucket number 4. The goal is we don't want to have to go to those funds until we're making, when it's the opportune time to do it. And that's the key to a plan. We can put all our money under our bed, and that's very safe, but it's not productive. So we want to be safe and productive, and then split it up accordingly based on what our clients' goals are. And that's why we're so much more goals-based than risk-based, I want to say, because it really depends what we're trying to accomplish. To me, that's just a much more holistic way of looking at what they're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Jim, as well as you did explaining all this, I know there's still a ton of questions out there, but we're running out of time on this podcast. So if people do have questions, they want to reach out to you, how do they get a hold of you guys?
A couple ways. They can go to the Well-Rounded Investor on our website. They can call the office at 281-665-3081, or they can always just shoot us an email. They can do John or Jim at CRIS Financial, that's CRIS Financial.com.
Fantastic. Jim, thank you so much for your time, and give our best to John, would you?
Will do. Thanks, Eric.
All right. And the last thank you goes to you, the listening audience. Thank you for tuning in and listening to the Well-Rounded Retirement Podcast with Jim Donewald and John Glowacz. If you have not subscribed to the podcast yet, please click the subscribe now button below. This way, when Jim and John come out with a new podcast, it'll show up directly on your listening device. This makes it much easier to share these podcasts with your friends and family. Again, thank you so much for listening today. For everyone at CRIS Financial, this is Eric Johnson reminding you to live your best day every day. And we'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to the Well-Rounded Retirement Podcast. Click the subscribe button to be notified when new episodes become available. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guest and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of CRIS Financial. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional investing advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service providers with any questions you may have regarding your investment planning.